I'm on a mission to recreate every Apex Legends character as a LEGO minifigure. So far I've done Lifeline, Octane, Bloodhound, Ash, Watson and Revenant, and in the last video the wheel decided that the next character to do is Vantage. This took a long time to make, not because the character was difficult, but just because I was extremely busy with college work. Vantage was actually pretty easy as characters go. Well, mostly. I started with the hair and headset thing, and it turned out to be much harder than I expected. There's no great individual piece that would work well for either her hair or headset, so I ended up seriously pushing this strategy of clipping a bunch of pieces together and figuring it out later to its limits. I don't even know what piece I ended up using for the headset visor thing, but I know I ended up mushing it together with a rangefinder and 2 or 3 different hair pieces. As you can see, it took a lot of experimentation, but I think I ended up with something decent. For the face, I took a slightly different approach. Usually for these figures, I have 2 references, one from an in-game screenshot and the other from the official site. There's usually some discrepancies between them, most of the time with the colours. Usually the artwork uses more vibrant colours, so that's usually where I lean in terms of making it into a figure. I mentioned this because for this figure, I know that it is ultimately the artwork pose from the site that I'm recreating, so I designed the face print with that pose in mind from the start, whereas usually I do the face print from the in-game reference. I also took way more time with this face print this time around. I noticed that there's an incredibly fine line between something looking right and looking way off. Often the difference is literally just a few pixels here or there. I spent ages working on the mouth print in particular, just deciding which lipstick version to use if at all. The torso wasn't anything particularly difficult, same story as usual really. The only minor challenges I could think of would be the bit of improvisation I needed to do above the ornament thing she's holding, because her hand is always covering this section in my references. And also generally, the fur design is always a bit difficult, but nothing crazy outside of that. The waist print the first time around wasn't too hard either. The most difficult thing about it was just making sure that the line thickness matched the torso as much as possible. But it did lead into what was easily the most difficult sections to print in a while, with the leg print. I started with the right leg and there was a lot to consider with it. I needed to line up that belt part with the belt print on the waist, which I managed first try thankfully, but then there was the loose part of her coat to contend with. Not only was there a lot of fur detail to include, but I needed to plan ahead so that the print on the crotch section lined up with it and continued through the left leg in a good looking natural way. This ended up being extremely difficult and I ended up spending a lot of time trial and erroring my way to get them to line up properly. The knee pad was also an obstacle that you may not have expected. I didn't want it too high up on the leg because it wouldn't look right with the coat overhang, but I needed space under it to include the bandage wrap and shoe tongue detailing. The solution ended up being kind of squishing its proportions a bit vertically. It kept a surprising amount of detail through the squish, and the horizontal stretching of the knee pad and shoe tongue is just an unavoidable part of translating into the minifigure shape, I think. I'm not sure if I biffed or nailed the boot print, but I think I captured the look well enough, so the only casualty really was the shoelaces, which are completely undetailed here. I then had to revisit the waist print to include the fur detail on the parting between the legs. This was entirely trial and error, not just to get the line thickness, but also how long and where on the UV map to print them. Not difficult per se, but definitely a finicky pain in the ass. The left leg started as a copy and paste job with the right leg, but quite a few details needed to be changed, the most obvious thing being the fur lining of the coat, which I needed to guess the alignment for, both on the right side and the top of the print. I got the alignment wrong on the top, so I needed to shift the print to the right some more, again just guessing where I think it should end up. I added more fur detail to this lining, changed the colour of a knee pad that nearly caught me out, and removed some scuff marks from the boot tongue, and left it there. I decided against side leg printing because there was no detail there that I really felt I needed to include. The left arm printing was surprisingly handy in terms of details and how well they translated, but I was having some annoying issues with the UV. The UV map I have has an outline of the minifigure arm, but when you apply it to the Mechafig model in Blender, the print continues way beyond the UV's borders, so I needed to kind of wing it in terms of extending the arm printing in towards the elbow, just so that it covers the figure the entire way around the arm. This isn't a new problem, but it is something I noticed here in particular because of the 2 intersecting details from the arm print. The right arm was just a copy and paste job from the forearm down, but above that I needed to change pretty much all of the printing. Again, nothing crazy difficult here. I did try and get the rolled up part of the sleeve to line up with the point where the dual molded parts connect, but the rolled up part was pretty wide and tall, so it wasn't really hard to do. Turns out both arm prints were pointless in the end because once the character is posed, you can't actually see them. This is probably something I should be more cautious of in the future because it really does waste a lot of time. Posing the figure wasn't too hard either. The most difficult part was including the bat figure and adjusting this in Photoshop later. But the pose itself wasn't too complex. She's just kind of looking up towards her shoulder with her arms up. The face print immediately looked so much better with her actually facing the right way, so seeing that come together was pretty satisfying. In terms of the Photoshop adjustments, my main focus was the headset visor thing, and of course getting the bat included and biting off a piece of meat. The headset's geometry really fucked up with these black marks in the middle, so that's the first thing I needed to fix. After that, for the bats, I rendered the figure with 3 different bat pieces, each angled and rotated a little bit differently. The one on the right gave me the head biting at just the right angle, and the one to the left of her was just to get that wing extended a little bit further back, so that it wasn't just perfectly flat. Both of these reference pieces were slightly annoying, because the piece that was there had the green ambient lighting reflecting off the torso piece onto the bat, but my imported reference pieces didn't. So I needed to actually go in and draw on the green glow myself. After that, I drew on the bat's face biting off the piece of meat, but I didn't know how to go about the meat for the minute. I painted the bat's face on using the regular color palette before applying a slight blur to it and setting the blending mode to multiply, which matched the colours on the rendered figure pretty well. Same thing with the nougat colouring on the bat's wings, but with it set to colour. For the face print, I had a problem with the shadow casted by the visor piece. Whichever way the environment texture worked out, it was casting this huge shadow over her face, which I wasn't a fan of. So I went back into Blender and rendered her again, but without the headpiece at all. This would give me a clean render of her face with the lighting actually hitting her. From there I took the new render and I put it on a layer under the old render, and I just erased from the old render where the shadow was and blended that using the blur tool, so it looked like a natural shadow without darkening any of her features. I ended up re-rendering her again, but with the half circle tile in her hand to act as the meat piece. I repeated the same steps as with her face shadow, and there you go, the finished figure. And here she is in the newly expanded group picture. The hardest part about this figure was definitely the headpieces, and generally just knowing which rendered pieces to mix and blend together in Photoshop after the fact. I'm extremely happy with the end result though. And now we let the wheel decide who the next character to do is. Once again, as long as it's not Gibraltar or Pathfinder or Caustic, I guess I'm happy enough. Well, something went wrong here. I didn't apply the wheel changes, okay. Okay. Feel good about this. Too bad. Turns out I fucked up the wheel a second time and Watson and Revenant were still in that last one. So let's try that again. We take those.